Good morning and welcome to The Art of Composition. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. I thought I would look at the photographer Herbert list today. And this is a series of video lectures that I've been doing for a while now. And what I do is I go onto the photographer's website, whether it's Magnum or whatever, and I just go through some of their work to point out a few things that may or may not help the photographer who's learning more about art, composition, and what it means to take a good photograph. Because with all this dynamic symmetry stuff that is out there, and part of this is what I'm doing too, there's a tendency to get too fixated on armatures and root rectangles and breaking images down using root rectangles. And that part of it is fine, but there's a lot more to taking a good photograph than just that. And in these video lectures, I don't focus in on breaking images down on grids. I look at other elements that are just as important when it comes to creating a good work of art. You have balance, you have figure-gram relationship, you have coincidences, you have the arabesque, you have a lot of different design techniques that go into what is considered a good work of art. And because I've been out photographing a lot lately, I've gotten back into it. You know, it's interesting. I took a few years to do a lot of research and study design, and my photography sort of ended up on the back burner. But I picked up the book The Essence of Photography by Bruce Barnbaum, and I read it 3 times. I finished my 3rd read earlier this week. And I've said it before, I think it's the greatest photography book ever written. And what it did for me, it pulled me out of that analysis paralysis mode that I was in. Because when you get into this, it's so easy to get fixated on armatures, like I said, breaking down images with all these different lines and all that. And it's fine to do that, but at some point you actually have to go out and photograph. And then that's the reality of what all this means. That's when reality sets in. And you realize that, okay, I've learned all this stuff. How can I apply it now? So you'll see that moving forward, a lot of my lectures have changed a little bit. But anyway, let me just poke around a little bit here. And like I said, my lectures are going to be changing a little bit. I don't talk so much about the armature anymore because I've done enough videos on that. When you download my user's guide, The Art of Photography, I have, I think, 4 or 5, maybe 6 videos on how to analyze a photograph using the basic 1.5 armature. And I think that's more than enough. I have to say this, that photographers can learn everything they need to learn about the armature and dynamic symmetry in a matter of a few days. You should not be spending months or years with this stuff. Forget the Barnstone stuff. It's too damn difficult. Focus in on the basic armature. If you're shooting in a 1.5, focus in on that, or whatever format you're photographing in. Don't go crazy with this overlapping stuff and becoming obsessed with all that. It's way too much. You'll never use it, and you're going to lose sight of what it means to take a good photograph. So just keep that in mind. All right, the first thing I noticed, you have good figure-gram relationship, and I've talked about this a lot in the past. I think this is one of the most important concepts when it comes to this type of work. Well, actually, it's not even this type of work, just photography in general, because whatever your subject is, they have to read clearly from its background. And I do see this mistake made a lot with street photographers. They have a really good idea, but their subject tends to blend into the background because they were not aware of this concept. And I'm very much aware of it. I don't even think about it anymore. But I also notice here you have a horizontal and a vertical division here. So you have this shape, and you'll see this shape in Bresson's photographs quite a bit. Now, if this figure was further back, it wouldn't be as balanced, and balance is very important. And that's why I always recommend Henry Rankin Poor's book on pictorial composition. He doesn't get into anything to do with dynamic symmetry, but he does talk about balance, and there's a lot of these concepts that are just as important as the armature, if not more important in many cases. So something to be aware of. One thing I do notice about his work, and I will say this, his black and whites are stunning when it comes to value rendition. And I've talked a little bit about this in the past because, like I said, I read Bruce Barnbaum's book, and Bruce Barnbaum teaches the zone system, and the zone system is what Ansel Adams used. And what that means is that you're properly rendering a photograph based on certain values from black to white, and it's a scale of 10 zones. And artists use this when they draw as well. So it's important to understand this concept, and I do recommend Bruce Barnbaum's book, The Art of Photography, because he does talk about that, and of course, the Ansel Adams series, the camera, the negative, and the print. But I do notice in his photographs that they are printed beautifully. And the values, one thing I notice with photographers that do black and white, or even color for that matter, they don't print them down enough. In other words, they'll have a highlight and they'll almost print it at paper-based white, or if it's a digital file, it's almost blank white. For example, it would be this white right here. But if you notice here, this value is around a zone 6. Zone 5, actually it's probably around a zone 5, which is the middle gray. Even though it's a highlight in the photograph, it's still a mid-gray in a print. And the reason for this is because you want detail. Highlights have detail. The only highlights that don't have detail are a reflection. And it's something that I am getting more into now that I'm doing these video lectures. Photographers need to understand how to render an image, technically speaking. So, and this is another example of that. I mean, even though this is a highlight here, it's not blank white. There's detail. You can see detail here. And Ansel Adams does talk about this a lot. And one other thing too is that even if you're a street photographer, you don't have to have people in your photographs. It's still a street photograph. And in the video, The Art of Street Photography, I can't remember which photographer mentions that, but that is a reality because a lot of the photography that I do on the street is not necessarily with people in it. So that's something else to keep in mind. And like I said, I'm just going to poke around a little bit. And here again, here's another really good example of a well-rendered image. These are highlights here, but look how dark the values are compared to the blank white here. And if you were printing this on photographic paper, this would be the paper base, and these would be the highlight values, but they're really printed down. And it gives you a print that is rich in depth. And I believe the same thing here. Yeah, I mean, the values are beautiful. All right, let me move on a little bit. When you're evaluating photographs, and as I go through these, when I pick a photograph, it's because I can tell right away it stands out compositionally. When you're evaluating photographs, a good photograph composed, let me put this a different way. A photograph that is well composed looks really good in a small thumbnail. This is a very small image, but I can tell the composition is good. You have these curvilinear elements spiraling in this fashion and then coming here. And I can tell that in the thumbnail. This is a well-designed photograph. It's moving in this direction, and all these curvilinear elements are moving the viewer around here. Starts here and then moves up and then around. If her face was in a different position, it would not work. But again, look at the values of the skin. The highlights in the skin tone, this is around a zone 5. And compare it to the blank white here. It's printed very deeply. I was looking at this photograph the other day. I like this photograph. My only issue, you know, it's funny. This is all personal preference too when I talk about these things. For myself in my own work, I try to avoid like things standing on top of people's heads. But, you know, there's scenes that you can't avoid that. And I'm not criticizing this photograph at all. And when you're doing your own work, you have to find a composition that suits you. It's not going to suit everybody, and you can't photograph for other people. You have to photograph for yourself. And I do believe this. When I photograph, I'm not photographing to make others happy. Honest to God, I could care less if anybody likes my photographs or not. That's not what's important to me. Now, when it comes to teaching, I want to try to give as much accurate information as I can, but whether I care or not, if somebody likes my photographs, I really don't care. And I don't mean that in a snobby way. But again, here, you have, I can tell right away, compositionally speaking, this works. You have all of these curvilinear arabesques going through, and your eye is constantly moving around this photograph. And of course, look at the values. Compare this value to this value. The prints, the images, they look rich, and Ansel Adams was brilliant at this. I'm not a huge fan of Ansel Adams' compositions. I think they're a bit flat, but I respect him for his knowledge in the darkroom and the quality of his prints. This is interesting because the focal point is here. It's sharp here and all the figures in the background are blurry, but the figures in the background matter, and how they're separated matters as well. If these were all jumbled together, it wouldn't work, even though they're out of focus. And that's something that you can play with too. Figure out what your focal point is in the photograph, because it's not always about the people. In other words, he could have focused in on these figures in the background and this would have been blurry, but I don't think it would have been as effective because this is more interesting than just the people in the background. This is a quirky thing in this photograph, and this is the focal point. This is lovely, I can just tell in a thumbnail. Beautiful figure-ground relationship. There's a lot of animation here. The figures are clearly separated out from each other. This was obviously taken later on in the day. And I like this area here. You have movement in here. There's just, this is lovely. Great photograph. I don't know if I said this, but I still have a cold. So I did a video lecture the other day and fighting a cold here. So, and again, good figure-ground relationship. These figures, the way they blend together because the shadows are so deep and dark, the negative shapes that it produces against the background, this is critical when it comes to placement. If these figures were anywhere else in the photograph, it wouldn't work because you have this strong highlight right here of the building separating out this figure here. If it had been anywhere else, it probably would not have worked. And you always have to be aware of how your figures are fitting in the elements of the background. You have a lot of lines in the background because of the buildings, and you have to place your subjects. You're not physically placing. You're waiting for your subject to land in a spot where it's going to fit nicely like a puzzle into the background, where it's going to read and the shapes are going to fit. And this is a perfect example of that. And again, look at the highlights. The values are around 5, 6 possibly. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying your subject has to fit in the background. Picasso, obviously. We've all seen a lot of photographs of Picasso by master photographers, Brazon for one. The head fits in this shape in the background nicely. The ear reads against this lighter area here. The head has enough space around this edge here. And the same thing on this profile. That comes about if you're a photographer and you're sitting in front of Picasso and you're photographing. If you move from left to right, you will see this relationship around him change. In other words, if you move left, this line is going to shift. If you move right, this line is going to shift. And Brazon talks about this in the video. It was with Charlie Rose. He says he was looking at Charlie Rose and he was pretending to take a photograph and he was moving his head back and forth and he's like, no, no, yes, yes, click. That's what he's looking for. He's looking at how all these relationships coincide, how they overlap. It's very important. This is a good example of, I would say, greatest area of contrast, because if you squint, even though you have highlights here, your eye still goes here because I believe it's the shape, and it might be a little bit lighter in value than here. It's a little bit hard to detect that because you have so much dark around here. But if you squint, to me, this is the greatest area of contrast, and that's where your eye is drawn first. Right here you have this sweeping motion going on. The bend in this woman's back and legs creates this movement, and the fact that he is leaning over, creating a curvilinear element here as he's bending down. He's looking down. So you have this sweeping motion right here. Again, if the figures were in a different position, it wouldn't be the same photograph, and it very well might not have worked. I've never seen these photographs, actually. This is the first time I'm looking at these. So again, here's a really good one, and I can tell just by looking at it in the thumbnail. You have coincidences of lines. The bend in her leg is coinciding with the angle in this leg, so you have this straight line right here. But you also have this sweeping motion right here, which moves you around in a circle. You have this foot coming down. Your eye travels here. There is a curvilinear element in the sand, and the foot starts here, moves around. The bend in this man's foot allows the viewer to continue around. The man's arm is outstretched. It's moving like this. So you're moving in a elliptical fashion around this photograph. If the limbs were any different, it would break that. It wouldn't work. And I'm not saying you necessarily see that when you photograph. You might have taken a series of photographs and looked at the contact sheet and said, okay, I have maybe 5 or 10 of these. This one works the best. I'll just take a few, look at a few more of these. Here's a good example of repeating diagonal lines. You have diagonal line here, 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 and here. The photographer is looking for repeating diagonal lines. If this man's head was not tilted at an angle, it would not work, because it wouldn't be repeating these diagonal lines here of the figures in the poster. It looks like is it a John Wayne movie maybe? I'm not really sure. But diagonal, 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 and then diagonal. Like I said, if his head was straight, it would not work. He's repeating lines. And those are the things that you're looking for. For example, if he's looking at this scene, he's not memorizing lines in his head. He knows what a good overall composition is. But what he is looking for is repeating diagonal lines. And you do see that when you photograph if you're an experienced photographer. I'm very much aware of that when I'm photographing. I'm not thinking about it so much, but I'm aware of it when it happens. These Magnum photographers, they are so good at what they do. All right, let me just see if I can find a few more. And again, you can photograph things that are not people and you can have a really nice photograph. And this is something that I do more often now as I've gotten older. I photograph people, but I also photograph things that aren't, and you can play around with the elements. You have this curvilinear element here you can play around with. It's a challenge, and I like a challenge when I'm photographing. It doesn't all have to be about people. a coincidence of line. You have this continuation here, and then it's moving around. But these are the things that you want to look for. Look how the angles in the limbs connect the subject to whatever, whether it's the background or in this case it's a sculpture. But really be aware of how lines connect, how they coincide, how they move around in a photograph. I think that's going to be it for today, though. I hope this helps a little bit, and I will be doing more of these in the future. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate it, as always.